know why I particularly noticed it with this book, but I was just reflecting while reading this romantasy, and I was like, why are protagonists or male interests in this type of books always having this kind of almost scary and definitely too optimistic penis sizes? Like, I'm just like, can't you just have a normal size protagonist? Like, they always go with descriptions as like, it was as big as they were, as tall as they were, am I gonna be ripped apart by it? And they always wear these pants that apparently are do nothing to contain their bulging manhood. How about having a male protagonist where I don't have to worry for the female protagonist to be split in two? How about wearing more loose pants, or not spending 2 sentences to describe a man penis? Like, it really does not need all of those adjectives. If you have to keep telling me how big they are, I'm like, do you even believe it?
A few moments later.
I don't know if I can say that online. Maybe I should just scrap that bit. But also, it's not like I can lose money. My videos are not monetized. I don't earn anything. I guess I can say whatever I want, but still, maybe I'll erase it. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, The Inked Reader. Today we are wrapping up the month of May, probably a bit delayed. I've read only 5 things, but I DNF'd 1 book for the first time in the year. I believe this is my first DNF. So we're gonna start there. We're gonna start with the DNF, and then I'm gonna tell you why I DNF'd it, and then we're gonna go into my enjoyment list, from the least enjoyable read to the most enjoyable read. And I think this month in particular should make it a big thing out of saying that it's a fully enjoyment read list, because quality wise, book number 2 is actually superb as a book, I think. So I'm gonna talk through it, but on average I tend to list those on what gave me the most joy while reading it, the one I was actively craving for, or maybe on the opposite side, you know, the one that terrified me the most, the ones that sparked the most emotions, but not necessarily the ones that left me with the most thoughts, or the most thoughts provoking. So yes, purely emotions usually when I make this list. So anyway, the DNF, we can be starkly clear on the fact that all the emotions that these managed to elicit within me were disgust and what am I doing right now? And I did not read only 50 pages. I did read 250 pages because there was a part in my brain that went, this must be famous because there must be something in it. Like, at some point the author's gonna turn around and tell me, ha, if I was just kidding, here's the actual story. And unfortunately I don't think it happens. So anyway, I DNF'd, and when I say DNF'd, I should say I had a physical reaction of disgust and rejection for Hunting Adeline. Adeline, how would you say, by H.D. Carlton. This is literally the story of a girl that falls for her stalker. Like, she is living her life and she notices that people, you know, there's someone getting their house, spying on her, and eventually attacking her in the house multiple times. So she has a stalker, and somehow we are led to believe that she is aroused by being hunted and sexually assaulted. So this is Hunting Adeline. I at one point, and I'm sorry, I'm gonna spoil the 200 pages I have read thus far, so if you don't want any spoilers, this book is shit. Just don't read it. I did hear people say, oh, but his behavior is because he wanted, to show that there is worse out there. I highly doubt that there is worse. I think when it comes down to these kind of behaviors, you can't really put them on a scale of what is worse and what is a bit better. This is psychopathic behavior and it's all wrong. So no, there's nothing worse than you out there. You are one of the most horrible things you can happen to a woman or anybody else. So I am disgusted by the fact that this is even a thing. And I was reading another book at the time, and there was a quote in the book which says the protagonist of the other book is reading something and go, you burn it right now. And that's how I felt about this book. I was like, that's the perfect quote on how I feel about Hunting Adeline. Set it on fire. This book could have been 2 pages long. Girl gets to live in her childhood or family home. She finds out that there is a man on the ground stalking her. Girls, sells the house and get the fuck out of there. That would have been the book. That would have been my book. Nope, absolutely. Instead, you got the opposite of that. Girl gets stalked and somehow she is turned on by that, while at the same time making us think that she's hating it. It's just twisted in a peculiar and unique type of way, this book. And I also have to say that according to Darwin, where the species is progressed by the strongest species, and the species have the most resilience and instinct of survival, that doesn't apply to Adeline, because with her instinct of survival she would have never passed childhood. She is actively playing not with fire, with a psychopath, which is worse. While I don't think her inner dialogue were an issue in here, apart from what she's talking about, but the way her inner dialogue was quite even relatable, very the writing style is a bit jarring, in the sense that there is this kind of maybe a good description of the house and then she would start swearing, or then she would try and make Adeline as someone who's got a few layers, at least as a character. We follow her on a train of thought, but then you get to the shadow, so you actually follow the stalker point of view, and that is absurd. It's like such a poor writing, and it's just jarring how much the contrast was. And usually you must say, okay, there are 2 distinctive characters, that's good, because they feel very 2 different people. But that felt like okay writing to absolutely shitty writing. Also, with everything that this guy, the actual stalker, could have been, she could have written it down as a psychopath who has any type of job. He could be a lawyer, he could have a shop, he could be a farmer, he could be any sort of job. What he does, this piece of shit, is he is a sort of vigilante for women and kids that get sexually abused and tortured and killed. So she makes this stalker, the psychopath who stalks a woman, rapes her, and there were a gun rape, okay? Rapes her multiple times, scares the living shit out of him, kills any of his other suitors, torments her. Miss Carton made him into a vigilante who protects women and children who are sexually abused. But he's not able at any point to look in the mirror and recognize what he's doing, which is fair enough. That is quite psychotic behavior. You got this almost a morale which it doesn't apply to yourself. So, but said that, I don't know if at any point in this book he gets arrested, he gets thrown in prison, the keys get thrown away, and Adeline realizes that this piece of shit is a psychopath, and he realizes what he's doing. I really hope that that's where this book is going, but I am afraid that that's not where this is going. So the fact that she could have chosen to make him into anything else, any kind of job, and instead she makes it so oppositional between what it's actually doing and what he's trying to stand up for. This kind of I am superior. First of all, he's the best at everything. He is the best at hacker, he's the best killer, he is the best spy, he's the best police officer, but he's also someone who sexually assaults women in their house. So it was just such a contrast that you can't make me believe this. This guy, they write books about guys like him. I've read those books, and they are called manuals for forensic psychologists on how to treat sexual deviant behavior, psychopathy, anything, the dark triad, the antisocial personality disorder. There are books about guys like him. These making into almost like a sexy erotica thing where she is hunted but she secretly loves and sexually turned on by it. No. And I know that I'm very much the wrong target, but to be completely blunt and honest with you, when you work with survivor of sexual abuse, especially if it's happened in their childhood, not necessarily in their childhood, but especially if it happens in their childhood, they might be sometimes, when you're touched, your body responds with arousal. It's just you sneeze. It's like a body response that some people have. But at any point, that body response is just as a mechanical response. It's not something you want. And I'm not saying that this always happens, that there is always an arousal. Not all the time, absolutely. But I am saying that when there was a physical response, that might cause a lot of feelings attached to, your body almost betraying you. You might feel like your body is betraying you. And I've seen how excruciating that might be on someone years down the line and having to process that. So anything that romanticizes rape or sexual abuse in any shape or form, it's a big, huge no for me. It's something that I am actually against morally, the fact that this is published. I think there should be, and I'm very much for freedom of speech, but I think there should be a ban when it comes down to any book or content that makes these sort of situations something that you are this is not guilty pleasure. This is not laughing matter. I am quite strict on the fact that there is a line that publishing, even self-publishing, should draw, and this one is crossing it in a manner that is disgusting. So I don't care to get to the end of this book and getting why he's doing it. It doesn't have any justification for doing what he's doing. There is no explanation in the entire world you can find to convince me that what he's done was justified. You can write to me a 3,000 words essay justifying his actions, and I would still call bullshit. It's so problematic. The message that she's sending here, the message that your stalker is this handsome, know-it-all paladin of justice as long as it applies to anybody else but not him. What the fuck are you doing? No. There were moments in my brain where I felt like an electric shock by reading this book. I was just burn it, don't read this. And I am sorry, I'm very much like you do, you like whatever you want. But if you like this book, I hope that you loathe everything it stands for. Even if you like it. Questionable, I'm sorry. But even if you like it, please tell me that there is absolutely nothing in this book that you would stand up for in real life. I did learn that maybe dark romances, there is a threshold for me, and I should stay the fuck away to the ones that include stalking, raping, and all of that. No. Anyway, I'm gonna move on. Okay, we had to move on the floor because the chair was stolen. Well, technically I stole the chair, so I had to give it back. So anyway, we are on the floor for the rest of the wrap-up, and this is actually the wrap-up of things I have finished, read them all. Let's start on number 5 with the non-fiction book for the month, and this was Respectable by Lindsay Hanley. This was a pick from a book club. This was advertised to us as the author discussing social class in Britain. However, what it turns out to be was the author experience of moving between working class and middle class. So it's very much focused on her own experience. It does not really look at other classes apart from working class. I think it would be better described as autobiographical. And if this was, instead of an actual full-length book if you want. If this was a collection of short essays, or even like a collection of longer essays, but a collection of essays about, the author personal experience of belonging to a class and moving to another class, I think I would have enjoyed these overall more, because while it kept my attention at the beginning, toward the middle part and the end, it became quite meandering. It moved from specific topics to other specific topics to specific to the author experience, and she lost me a bit. She lost my interest, and eventually I grew bored. So to start with, though, the thing that I really, really enjoyed, it's how relatable this was to my own experience. And I also think that although this, yes, it's, focuses on Britain social classes, I think that in general, apart from some nuances, the rules are universal. She spoke, for example, of having this kind of wall in your head according to, if you belong to a certain class or another, and how this belonging to a social class creates this invisible wall in your head, which is very still much present even if you end up moving from one social class to the other. Takes the Berlin Wall as an example. And now people, even in the aftermath of the wall being torn down, how some people still had that wall in their head and lived their life with that wall still in their head. And in my very limited personal experience with people that lived through that historical period and in the aftermath of it, I can say very much that I noticed the same thing, where somehow the divide was still very much present, although not physical and visible anymore. It was still ingrained in them. She also talks about how these walls and our behaviors that come to belonging to a specific social class, they might stick around longer after you've moved or plodded along and get yourself to another social class. She also addresses something along the lines of how you are never really welcomed, or that you might struggle to fit in the new class, and although economically you now might belong to a class, the social constructs in the class might not accept you, so you might still struggle to fit in the new class, and at the same time you don't fit perfectly in with your origin class, for example. She talks from working class moving to middle class, but how also new money versus old money, and how things are still very distinct, and how one group of people would struggle to accept, and most of the time does not accept or make fun of the people that have moved class. So even if you move economically, there is a social boundary that's much harder to overcome. What also really hit home is the fear of losing your social status, of your new class being taken away, living with a lingering dread that this could be taken away from you at any point. I caught myself a lot of the times feeling shame while reading this book, and then I kind of tried to stop and think of why was I feeling so ashamed of reading someone else's experience and finding it so close to mine. Maybe this is a mix of shame that it's mine, but also shame that I've absorbed as a child for belonging to a class that it's in general in itself considered shameful these days and uncouth. And I just noticed very much how much feelings this was stirring into me. So I think what I took away from this book the most, and I went very personally into this, there was a lot of introspection while reading this book, was what it meant for me, her words, how it brought back to some very deep buried parts of myself. I would often give voice to flimsy thoughts and feelings that I might have felt since I can remember, but now I could see them stark on on a piece of paper. And she talks about that desire for self-improvement that comes not necessarily from a desire to climb class per se, but from not ending up as other people in your family, and it's the idea of breaking that cycle. And sometimes you can break the cycle if economically you move on to a different class at times, and you don't want to feel, or you don't want to end up been exploited, because that's what happens sometimes when you're, for example, part of a working class, right? The exploitation that you experience being working class is definitely made bigger than, you know, someone who's old money. So it's the idea of, I don't want to get exploited, therefore I need to break the cycle, I need to improve myself socially, I need to improve myself economically in order to be less exploited. So all of those thoughts are quite also shameful to think that there is something necessarily wrong to be in working class, and then I caught myself feeling ashamed for that, and then feeling like ashamed for feeling the shame of belonging to a class, and how that felt wrong but also true at the same time. So that's what I'm saying. It was very complex emotionally in my mind. This book stirred a lot of things. And then I would push back, because apparently I can put up with a lot of things, but feeling ashamed is where I draw the line, where I retreat and go back and say, nope, I'm not doing this. And so she was speaking to me, for me, as if she was me on a lot of points that she made in this book. Yet she's also speaking about so many other people I've met, and so many other that I will never meet. She speaks about the school system a lot. She speaks on how, you know, young boys, for example, that she could remember, that would act up in school, almost like misbehaving as a big fuck you to the system that has set up for them to fail, has no expectations of them. So if you are expected to do nothing, to achieve nothing, then you can just, you know, laugh it out and not do anything, kind of fulfill the prophecy, to say fuck you to the prophecy, if it makes sense. And I've seen so much of that working with young people. She addresses the fact that a lot of us, definitely guilty of that, we judge an institution or an experience based on the feelings that we have of that experience. So let's say I go to a school, I have a good time, then the school is amazing, I would recommend it. I go to a school, I don't have a good time, therefore I wouldn't recommend it, the school is shit, it's horrible, right? We call that in CBT like emotional thinking, where your emotion dictates the reality you create around you, but that might have nothing to do with the actual quality of the teaching. The teaching might be very, very good, you still have a bad experience, therefore you would never recommend the school, and the school is labeled as bad. And that is not the reality of it, right? Other people might have a completely different experience and actually get a lot out of that teaching. So how emotion shape reality, and it's how it works in CBT. At times, you know, we try to think more rationally, emotions are a guide but not the truth. And yet, you know, I'm now training in a different modality, and I've been more appreciative of how emotion do shape our reality. And yeah, I can definitely have a lot of examples of schools or experiences of teaching where I found good or bad, and therefore labeled the whole thing bad or good according to how I experienced it. So many points I had not thought about, you know, how the system changes yet perpetuates the same structures. New universities are emerging left and right, and yet the way they are structured within themselves, like the way we are structured, they maintain the class divide. So how, you know, you can change things, and yet the lingering effect of disempower or, you know, inequality can stay the same. She addresses the general truth of how the government wants to kind of keep the lower classes not completely invisible, because they can also be a powerful tool to tell the middle class, you need to behave, you know, middle class, you need to behave, you need to pay your taxes because you don't want to end up like that. So you need to be able to say at a distance in order to know that you have to behave not to end up there, right? That is to say that she's not, in herself, she's not saying that working class is bad. I think she's actually trying to address how that is wrong as a concept to think it as bad. At the same time, though, she's telling us in all the way in which society has made it into something that was bad, because decades ago this wasn't the case. I spoke with, you know, my club, book club mates, and they are from, you know, most of them are British, and they have a bit more background than I had, and so they told me, you know, back in the days, like decades ago, working class was very respectable, and now things have changed now. So she's touching upon that, but not too much. Yet, while I extrapolated all of those very important messages from these, from the halfway point, through, she does throw these messages in very lengthy chapters full of specific details. She might go on for like 10 pages about different bands in England and bands that she used to like and bands she didn't like, or even the newspaper thing gets very down to the minimal detail and her own experiences of her own family. So she kind of then loses me in those things. So I had to really struggle at times to find a certain sentences here and there. She said, okay, this is what she means. But when she goes into so much details about her own music taste, for example, which I'm like, what's the point of these? She also does not address any other class. So while I was going into these to have an overview of classes in Britain, I didn't get that. She mostly focuses on working class. Nothing wrong with that, but I must say that there was completely like experience of being middle class or, you know, old money, new money, whether it's completely dismissed. So it was not a comprehensive view on classes. She also does not touch upon any intersectionality whatsoever. She does not talk about how, you know, class and race or gender plays into the thing at all. And I thought that was a missed opportunity, because I think she should have still addressed at least a few things. So yeah, would I suggest these? I think my book club has now sent like a message with more like comprehensive books around class, which I'm very interested in now. I might reach out for other books before I suggest these. Yet I think if you have a similar background as the author does, you might find some of her emotions and thoughts put on paper quite relatable. Then I did listen to When the Moon Hatched on Scribd. I pay for Scribd subscription. It was there. I listened to it, and I think this is the start of our series. And in this, you follow an assassin who's captured and then rescued by a broody, sexy thing. I mean, it's not a thing. It's not human. I would dare say that he's a fae, but I'm not 100% sure. I don't remember what he is. But anyway, she gets rescued by him, but she's not very happy to have to spend a lot of time with him in his kingdom. I think I've already spoken in my intro about the point I made about male interests, penis sizes. So let's move on to the actual this is what I meant. This is the book that made me think that, and then I cut it off and say maybe I can just pop this at the beginning, because I thought it was inappropriate to put any point in the video, so why not starting with that? So yeah, I was just reading these and I just noticed this book is not any worse than any other romantasy I've read. I just noticed that, you know, how absurd the descriptions of the manhood are. And just like, it's always the same, like it's like in all romantasy all the guy have the same penis. Anyway, let's move on from this, and let's say this book, where was I? This book was 3 stars. It's definitely not my kind of thing. I found this type of stories quite dull overall. The beginning was the strongest part. We had our protagonist just trying to survive. She had some odds against her, and so she had a good feisty attitude, which I enjoyed. She got herself in a bit of trouble, so there was some slashing and dashing around, bit of action, really appreciated that. And then the whole focus becomes the romance. Everything slows down and you really focus on what I would say slow burn romance. Take it with a pinch of salt. And that is when I got bored. Don't take this in the wrong way. I didn't mind Khan as a male protagonist. I appreciated how he defends Rave in one point by, rather than claiming ownership of her, by addressing her as someone who's more honorable than him. So he doesn't take away her agency, he actually gives her value and says, you know, she deserves respect as a human being on her own, which I found quite refreshing, because a lot of the times in these type of stories, she's mine, I've claimed her, hands off. That's not what's happening in here. I also found quite jarring the fact that she used this very poetical, lyrical prose, at times a bit pretentious, but I could be on board with that. It's okay if you want to use 5 adjectives to describe a sunset. I find sunset particularly beautiful myself. So I'm good with that. I will put up with your writing style, but then when she had sex scenes, she would just throw in some basics, dicks and tits terms. And I'm just like, you've spent so much time writing a chunk of a book, hours of audiobook, making your every sentence so flowery, just want to go down to the basic anatomy when it comes down to sex scenes. And I know that you can write sex scenes quite lyrically, quite poetically. You don't necessarily have to be very mechanic, you know, you can hint at stuff, you can still do it in a very sweet lyrical way, because I've read some of those, very rare, but I've read those, so I know that she could have. So I found a bit odd that she chose to just, well, when it comes down to, you know, banging each other, then we're gonna go back to lay terms. And I'm like, I just couldn't care. I just got bored, and because the whole thing was focused on that romance side for, you know, 3/4 of it, I just lost interest. Now, I didn't mind the ending. If I find myself out and about and the sequel will come up on script, I might listen to it. I'm definitely not paying for this though. Another very meh 3 stars book for me this month was 3.25, 3, probably 3. It's Butt Eater, which is the majestic Illumicrate Nevernight edition, but I have already sold these, so it's on its way to a new home to be loved and appreciated more than I did. The premise of this book is what caught my attention and what made me prioritize this book as soon as it arrived. It arrived just a couple of months ago, not even that, maybe I think it arrived in April, so I read it in May because this was advertised as the story of a girl who, as a job, she cleans up crime scenes. You got me there. She got me there. I was like, I need to read this. But what really this is about, it's about Kara having lost her sister in an awful attack one evening, and then in this book she's chasing after the killer of her sister while being chased herself by something else. So it ended up very much in the middle ground, which is a huge disappointment in a sense, because I was like, the premise sounds so cool. So what it did well though, I think I would start with that, what I enjoyed, because there are definitely parts of it I enjoyed. I really enjoyed the atmosphere. It was decadent, it was splatterish at times, some scenes were very splatter horror. I also like how melancholic this was. It really came across the pages, the kind of deep sadness. It is a sad book, and throughout my experience of reading it, I felt that. I think it did steer in me the emotion that I think wanted to steer in the reader. That's my interpretation of it, at least. And the creepiness factor, as I said, not many scenes, not many horror scenes, but the one that we have were quite creepy. You can trust in the fact that if you put a creepy tube scene, nighttime, in a tube, no train, no people around, you will more than likely creep me out. Another factor that I would judge quite positively is the message behind this story, and how she's really trying to address the onslaught of hate that Asian people got in the aftermath or during the pandemic, during COVID-19. So this is much a very recent book. It takes place during the pandemic. The harrowing reality where in Western worlds, when Asian women or people in general went missing or were murdered, often the justice is swept under the carpet and the killer is never caught, the attention is not given. So having our main protagonist living through the hate of that period and how horrifying that was, and experiencing the abuse, and also being pushed and abandoned by people like you are invisible, I see you when I want to insult you, or if I want to make a joke out of you and call you butt eater or whatever, but then when you actually need me, I'm gonna pretend you're not there. So that message I think really came across, and therefore I did enjoy the message. I did enjoy the ending. I think the ending is gonna cause a split between people. Some people might enjoy it, some people might find it whoa, disappointing. Because of the message and everything that she was telling us, I think I enjoyed the ending. I think it was fit for purpose for what she aimed to the message that she was aiming to send us, I think. So although I wasn't disappointed in the message, I was disappointed in the execution. I think it's quite messy at points, and with messy I mean that it's quite nonsensical. There was a point, not only some murders I think at the end of the day needed a bit more explanation and they were a bit far-fetched, but some of the things that these characters get away with or do are absolutely like, you can't suspend belief in a novel like this, grounded so much in reality and in people's experiences. Like, it felt a bit like disjointed the experience of this is what happened to a lot of people, this is reality, yet accept the fact that the protagonist can enter a police station, pretend to be the wife of one of the officers, and no one questions her, and they actually give her stuff. And I'm like, don't they know the officer was a police officer in that precinct? They knew him. They probably knew very well that he wasn't married. So you, very young, looking very young girl, coming in and say, I'm his wife, can I get his stuff? And them, yeah, here we go. Makes no fucking sense. So there were some plot holes quite big like that, and that really bothered me, to be fair, and that definitely lowered the rating quite significantly. I also found myself in the middle quite bored because the execution was, again, so poor at times. So some like, this is nonsensical, this doesn't add up, that I got myself less interested and therefore I became quite bored. I did enjoy the end, so it picked up again, but for a short book like this you shouldn't really be boring me. It doesn't have enough pages in itself to justify being boring at any time. Yeah, that's why it's going. I'd overall happy I read it. Now I know what it's about, but not enough. It wasn't good enough for me to keep it. We are at number 2, and number 2 comes with the caveat of this objectively would be the best book of the month. Quality wise, the scope of the story, the prose, everything that this book stands for, this is the book of the month. And the only reason why it's not in the first spot is that because the first book in the first spot served a function that was very much needed in this month of my life. And I knew that if I read these books at different times in my life or separately, this book would probably come first, because quality wise I really appreciated it. Yet as an experience in terms of emotions was mostly made me think rather than feel, which is not a bad thing at all. I love when the book make me think, but that's the reasoning behind. And I'm speaking number 2, I will put Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell. This is my second Mitchell book. It's not gonna be my last though. I really enjoy his prose and just how good he is as a writer. Now, what this book is about, I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to be coherent in telling you the plot of this book. So what I'm gonna say that this is categorized, marketized as a sci-fi, and it's truly a story made of different parts, almost like short stories that are conjoined in time and space to certain degrees. They are interconnected and they come full cycle. So you have 6 short stories, I want to say it's 6, don't quote me on this, but I want to say it's 6 stories that go in chronological order and then reverse back. So you finish on a timeline with the first story, with the same timeline of the first story. That's the best I can do, okay, in terms of a plot. And honestly, because the stories are, yes, one the son of the other, one the offspring of the other, yet so unique, you would have to describe the 6 stories and give you a synopsis for each of the 6 stories, which would be too lengthy. So, what a feat of writing this was. What a crazy, genius idea this was. This was truly, I think, almost like a flex. The author was flexing his abilities as a writer. This is a book that admits no distractions, and reading this as a foreigner, reading this as English my second language, stretched my English abilities and put them to the test. There are some stories that are written in, he creates a dialect in all of these that did challenge me quite a bit in a lot of places, and being in a state of mind where my mind kept wandering and I had a profound feeling of sadness, so I couldn't really stop my mind from wandering, I would have to reread things over and over again between, you know, my mindset but also the writing style. And that is to say that it was a task almost at times reading these. Yet I don't mind the challenge. I think I actually personally find the challenge quite interesting, and when I got used to it, when I understood what this was, I was definitely much on board. I jotted down a few thoughts about the singular stories, so I am gonna share them with you. I apologize if I'm gonna butcher the name of the stories, because I don't think I wrote them down exactly verbatim as I should have, the titles, but I'll do my best. And I thought, because the stories again are so unique in their own way, it makes sense for me to just kind of cover a few points for the different stories. My favorite one probably will have to be the Timothy Cavendish Ordeal Part 2. I found that story is very funny, also very sad, and I found the way it shows us what it means to become old and become invisible for society masterfully done. I think he does in a way that feels very much clear. You interwoven these in the story in a way that feels very natural, and so it felt like a denunciation done through experience, and that it's very powerful, these men telling us, you know, how he felt about becoming irrelevant in that way. So loved that. That is probably my favorite part. Also, yeah, as I said, bloody funny. The Sonmi Horizon 451, I don't remember if it was part 1 or 2. At one point, he makes this, I would say random, but nothing is random in this book, but he makes this point of saying how, you know, our loved ones, when they go to work or to school, they enter this dimension that you're not part of, and you are not part of that reality. You have no idea what actually that lived reality is. They live almost like in an alternative universe for a few hours. It's like a dimension that you might have an idea of, and it's probably nothing like you think it is. It made me think of those characters that disappear from pages, from chapters on end, and then they reappear, and you wonder what they're been up to in all the time that you've been apart. And I was like, this happens every day in everyday life with my loved ones. My child goes to school, and I have absolutely no idea what that looks like for her. How is she there? What interaction does she have? What she sees and hears, like, it's completely alien to me. So that was, you know, when you realize something that's so obvious, and at the same time so obvious you never even thought about it, because it's just part of your reality that you don't really stop and think about it. So I don't know what, I was blown away by that concept of, wow, like they step out of my reality and live theirs. Yeah, I had just one of those moments. I also, don't get me started on the whole thing about what being happy means and what happiness is. We would stay here for too long if I say so myself. And although said that, Sonmi and the more futuristic stories that takes place in the future, those were the ones I overall struggled with the most, as a mix of the prose used, the dialect that it's created in them, but also I just preferred the old stuff or the contemporary stuff. And those are also the reasons why I couldn't give a full 5 stars, and I gave this probably 4.5 stars, because something in them made me respect them a lot, but not love them to bits. There is the fact that I am very much still getting used to sci-fi. It is a thing that up until a few months ago, maybe a year ago, I was not interested at all. It's just an atmosphere, a vibe that I don't connect with. And so, yeah, coming from having like old stories, contemporary stories, to very futuristic stories where everything is robotic and weather, it's just for a very personal taste thing. Particularly the Sonmi parts. They were also the more lengthy ones, and again I do wonder if they had not been the lengthiest of the book, if I would appreciate it and give it a full 5 stars, because I might have. I found them a bit too long at times for my taste, but very personal thing, is nothing to do with the quality of them, to be fair. Said that the Zlusha Crossing, I don't know how you pronounce it, that story, while being futuristic, really pushed my buttons, really made me feel all the feelings. The baby part, the stark reality that they live in, this war that has now gone back to zero, being, you know, to being savages with tribes and killing each other in that way that we might have done back in the days. That was so profound. It was very much of a struggle going through it because of, again, the prose, but then I really paid and focused on each singular sentence, and so I appreciated and extrapolated from each sentence I had to read over and over again in order to fully understand it. I spent a lot of time with that story, and I really appreciated its nuances and what it was saying with that story. I found that the most grueling one, the most it brought the cynic in me. It brought out the cynic of, okay, yeah, that's humanity for you. And yet again, it encapsulates what humanity means, at least for me, or a part of me, how I view humanity so well. There was a point, for example, he makes about, if only you could go back and tell your old self, yes, you've not made the best choice, but you were doing what you could in horrible circumstances that you were given, knowing that it's not an option, but you can't go back and live a better life because you've been warned. It's too late. There's no going back. There is not what if. It doesn't exist. So having that sadness of what if, knowing that it's an impossibility in itself, really, that's what I mean, like the emotions were there, like it just stirred that kind of sadness for, you know, how life cannot be undone, or how certain choices we can't unmake. And yeah, so all of that was in, so carried all of that weight for me. I must say, I'm not sure I got the ending. I think I got the ending, but I'm still a bit confused on that story ending. And the last two stories, which are actually the second part of the first two stories, really enjoyed those ones. They were back in the day, so they were taking place, you know, a century ago, a couple of centuries ago actually, I believe, one at least. And those one I really, really enjoyed. The Letters from Zedelgem, butchering the name, I'm sorry, but those ones I found particularly melancholic. I found them particularly sad and harrowing, and just it was a coincidence also that the story takes place in Bruges, which is in Belgium, and I had just watched, I never heard of that place before until I watched recently in Bruges, and I watched that movie, and then I could really see the protagonist of that story. You know, I could picture the town and the atmosphere of the town because I watched that movie and was like, what a coincidence. I found the protagonist of that story particularly likable, and somehow I was particularly interested in him compared to the other characters, apart from Timothy Cavendish. I think that character caught my attention and captured my attention the most. I think the intrigue was from the fact that it's a human being that character-wise is such like a different human being than I am. So it's a window into our mental state and reality that I will never get to live myself. So I found myself quite curious. It didn't also hurt the fact that there was an Eva in the book that had very much relevance in the story, and it's rare to get my name in a book, at least of the books I've reached out for thus far, and so having my name on pages like, oh, that's Eva. I love the whole miscommunication bit, by the way. I thought it was sadly hilarious. Adam Ewing's story, I think it brings the whole thing to full circle, and it does in a very inspirational way. This idea that we can change and better ourselves, and that we shouldn't be deterred by the fact that we are one in a million. Because yes, we are one singular element of a whole, but everything that's whole, it's made of singular elements. So that was truly inspiring. So although again this is a number 2, I think this is one of the most brilliant type of stories I've read in a good while, and it has definitely entered my heart in a sense. I think I won't forget this book anytime soon. I need to rewatch the movie. This concept of us living in a cycle, and the eternal cycle of life that's made of creation, destruction, and then creation again and destruction, it's both bittersweet. I also found quite ironic, there is a Netflix documentary where there is a guy basically saying there was another civilization, it was destroyed, and then we started again, and that's been happening. And so I found like the guy would love this book, and that's when the bitterness comes in, because it left me with a lingering bitter feeling in my mouth of, no matter how much we rotate, or how much of a civilization goes back to zero and start again, we are doomed to repeat the same cycle. Is there anything else apart from a cycle? Can we do anything else? Is there a scenario in which we do not repeat the cycle, or the cycle is the only thing that actually exists? All of those questions, and Do ants have headaches? I really would love to know. And at number 1, we have A Wish Upon the Stars. Now, this is the fourth and not last book in a series by TJ Klune. He is quite popular nowadays to write like almost cozy fantasy. I've read other stuff by him, but this is probably my favorite series by him thus far. And in the first book, you follow Sam. Sam is an awkward teenager, apprentice of a king wizard, and he's hopelessly in love with the captain of the guards for the king, Ryan Foxheart. And he is accompanied on his adventures by a bad-mouthed unicorn, hornless, and a very sweet giant. And this book is a parody. It's a comedy on the trope of the chosen one. I think this book is full of humor. This book does not, the series to be fair, doesn't have a solid plot. Don't go into this because of a plot. Go into this if you like the humor, and if you don't like the humor after a few pages, drop this book. It's not for you. Move on, because that's the core of it. It's funny dialogues while going on this very tropey adventure that makes fun of it, of a trope of a chosen one, basically. And it is, though, if you like the humor, hilarious. And I fell in love with these characters, and I genuinely had some good laughs. The author himself, in the footnotes, describes the series as an overtly immature take on a common fairy tale trope, which was written to serve a purpose. So the author says, I was in a very dark moment of my life, and I wrote this because I needed to have some characters to love and a genuine laugh. And I think this did that exactly for me. I needed a laugh in one of the absolute darkest moments of my life. I needed a respite, an half an hour a day of just immersing myself and having a good laugh. So this served that purpose of making me laugh when I thought I couldn't laugh maybe ever again. Of course, I'm dramatic. I'm dramatic still because of that mental state I'm in. But this truly picked me up when I was very much down. I came back from dinner. I said I was gonna film this in different days, but I realized I'm in school all weekend. So I don't have any other days to film this. Part of why I couldn't give it a full 4 or 5 stars is because how much I have an emotional attachment to this. I truly needed those laughs, and I truly laughed out loud in a few moments. There is still the fact that plot-wise, it's so cringy. I know it's a parody. I know it's a joke on a trope, but in some moments it almost takes itself too seriously, and it becomes quite cheesy. And that was parts that made me roll my eyes a bit. I must say also that the fourth book is probably my favorite with the first one. In the second and third book, I had some issues in terms of, it was very lengthy. I got a bit bored, and the humor didn't work that much for me because I don't know why. Maybe it's the same here and I didn't notice because my mood was different. But in the second and third book, I wasn't in much of a need of a relief as I was now and as I was when I read the first book. So those two books, central books in the series, didn't have the same function to serve, and therefore was over analytical of them. I was picking things apart and noticing how the humor, it was very vulgar. It's a very full of sexual jokes, just the whole thing is a huge sexual joke, and it bothered me. While here, again, I found it quite hilarious. I also noticed in the second and third book there were a lot of explicit sex scenes, and I'm not particularly a big fan of them, especially when they are so detailed and very much very graphic. And I'm like, I don't want to read any sort of sex scenes between any character. Not to this degree of details, not for pages and pages of step by step a sexual encounter. And the second and third book, there were too many of those. In here we get 1 or 2, and they are probably 3 to 4 pages long. So those things made me go, okay, let's oh, I didn't skim read, but I kind of almost skim read them, like, okay, this is happening. And it made me uncomfortable. I noticed that the more descriptive they are, the more they take away something from the story. It becomes mechanical, it becomes like, what, why? But why do I need to read step by step, caress by caress, penetration by penetration? Like, why? But there are less sex scenes in this than I remember being in the third, at least in the third and the second book. So I could put up with it more. And it was just absolutely hilarious. These are some of the most unhinged characters you will ever meet. They just, so many nonsensical things. They're just hilarious. I'm just gonna tell you, at one point, there is a mention of criminal nuns that fight with their fists giants. Just, you don't need to know anything else. This was a return for me to the glory of the first book. The first book, which is The Lightning Struck Heart, there is a song in that book made by a bard, and that had me cry. Yeah, I was in a park. I was just crying so much, I had tears streaming down my eyes. And to these days, I carry in my wallet a copy of that song, and when I'm in a bad mood, I reread the song. That's how much power that book had for me. I also must say, one thing that helps is that me and Sam, we would definitely be best friend if ever. I'm sorry, Justin. Love Justin, by the way, and the next book is about him. But me and Sam, I do think like Sam at times, and I don't voice that because it would be so awkward and people would just look at me like I'm completely nuts. He does in this book. So I'm like, Mr. Clune, like me and you, I have that train of thoughts at times. It's just hilarious. So I could kind of see myself in some of the train of thoughts of Sam. There was a moment in this where Clune throws in a jab at O.J. Simpson If I Did It book, which is a whole thing. I'm not gonna spend any time here, but it's O.J. Simpson was an obsession of mine, so I've read all of it about the case, and I was like, did you just throw in a joke that it's masking an Easter egg for a book by O.J. Simpson? And he did, and I was like, I got that, Mr. Clune, I know what you were doing, I caught that. So it was full of those kind of moments of like, it got me, something stirred within me with this book. So yeah, overall, it's not 5 stars because quality-wise, it has some flaws that are just too evident. There are pages and pages of dialogue where it goes nowhere, and I didn't find it boring in this one, but in the other two I did. But I must admit that nothing is happening for hundreds of pages apart from just two people going back and forth and then someone come in and say something else hilarious, and that I loved it, but I know what's happening here and nothing is happening here. So not a 5 stars quality wise, but a 5 stars in my bruised heart. So guys, that's all I've read. Thank you so much for watching. I'm not gonna linger around here. We can just say goodbye. I hope you decide to stay and subscribe. I hope you decide to chat with me in the comments down below. I hope you have a great reading month ahead of you, and take care of yourself. Go well. I'll see you next time. Ciao!